Welcome to the Board Ghost episode primer for Lovecraftesque.
If living is a highway, then heaven is a bus stop. Been waiting for a minute there, but has it been forever?
This is our quick rundown of how we play Lovecraftesque and generate our stories. So Lovecraftesque is a GMless game designed by Joshua Fox and Becky Annison, and it's published by Black Armada Games. GMless means that you don't have to have a game master, someone who's setting up the story. You are going to generate your story collaboratively, though it is recommended that someone read the rules ahead of time, or someone who has played this game before kind of helps facilitate and keep the game moving along. That maintaining the rules, basically keeping people, especially people who are new, make sure that they're not being overwhelmed so they can focus on the story aspects. You can purchase a copy of the game at blackarmada.com. Play, you're going to need 2 to 5 people, the rulebook, a set of special cards, which you can also print from a book or purchase from the publisher, a dozen or so index cards, some scrap paper, and writing utensils. Additionally, there are some printouts you can put out, like a teaching guide and an inspiration table. There are also cue cards that remind you of the roles that you're going to be passing around. And you can also print out copies of the setup sheets, which you could just use a blank piece of paper or index cards, but they're available to download at blackarmada.com if you want to have something a little more official to work from, but they're not necessary. There are going to be 3 roles that rotate as you play. There's the witness, who's playing the main character, the narrator, who describes the environment and other characters, and also makes sure that the scene requirements are met, usually revealing a new clue, the watchers, which is everyone else, or no one if you're playing a 2-player game. These watchers support the narrator by adding embellishment and texture suggestions. So the game plays out over 3 parts. Part 1 is 5 scenes long. Part 2 is 3 scenes long, or up to 3 scenes long. These scenes are based on the introduction of clues that provide new information or depth to the horror. And some scenes will also have additional requirements depending on how the game is playing out. Part 3 moves the story along to the conclusion with scenes called The Journey into Darkness that leads to the climax with the final horror, which is the second to last scene, and wrapping up with the final scenes called the epilogue. There are a few cardinal rules for scenes until you reach the final horror. So you can't have anything blatantly supernatural, you can't have anything that's a clear threat to the witness, and you cannot have any direct evidence of violence. Though there are special cards that will allow you to break these rules a little bit, especially going into part 2. So you start setup before you get into scenes. First, you pick the tone of the game. Is it investigative? Is it heroic? Is it comedic? It's going to be horror. It's a Lovecraftesque game, but what kind of horror will it take on? You then determine the veils and lines, things that should be banned or avoided. You're dealing with troubling stuff. There's some things that you may not rather get into. This is actually something very important to consider when you're approaching a game that's based on stories born out of problematic times and cultures. Lovecraft is a pretty troublesome dude. I won't get too into it, but he had some strong thoughts, and his ideas and his paranoia come out of some of his lesser angels of his nature. Another thing that they kind of recommend is that you don't actually reference things as being from Lovecraft's writing. So you don't even have to have read Lovecraft if you just understand what sort of existential horror is, or, this kind of weird creeping sense of doom. But they kind of say, don't talk about Cthulhu or Migos or any of this stuff. Let the mystery be its own thing. It'll make it much better. In fact, they'd also recommend, it's not really a cardinal rule, but one of the sort of standard rules is don't discuss anything. Let everyone have their conceived notions and let those notions clash, because that will add to sort of frustration and the mystery and the tension if you're only focusing on the game itself and not discussing anything unless you reach an impasse. Moving further into setup, you're going to, on an index card, write down the era you all agree upon that you're playing in, and then where the story is set. Broadly, where it's set, like what, area of the world or whatever, and also what the specific main location is. Then each person creates one further location. It can be a separate place within this broad setting, or it can be a more specific place that's inside the main location. So if the main location is the hospital, it can be the morgue or the sanitarium or whatever. It can be different, or the psych ward. All different aspects of one location is possible too. On separate index cards, you write down the information about your witness as you all agree upon it. Who is the witness? What is their name and role? They'll be the focus of your story. Determine why the witness is at a location that you chose. Choose a personality trait to act as the anchor as you collectively play the character. So something that all of you can kind of work with as a core for this character, because you're going to take turns playing this character. Then you're going to decide on a source of strength that keeps this character grounded and moving forward against this creeping horror, these outside threats. This can be another personality trait, or it can be something external, like a religious belief or, a sense of duty or nationalism or family. Now you're going to roll into your first scene. A player that has a clue and a situation for that first scene takes the narrator role and that cue card if you're using cue cards. The witness role is handed to the player to the narrator's left. So they're going to have the witness card and the witness's like index card and the witness's cue card, so they can kind of be reminded of what the witness does. And everyone else gets a watcher card. So the narrator introduces a scene, describes the environment, reinforces the sinister, oppressive atmosphere, and plays other characters other than the witness. They also give space for the watchers to contribute, though the narrator is the arbiter of what is in a scene and can revise or veto watcher suggestions as needed. When the requirements for a scene have been met, it's up to the narrator to declare when that scene ends. So they want to make sure all the things are in there, that the clue gets hit, if there are other aspects like of a final horror thing, that all those things are ticked, and then say, okay, we're going to bring this to a nice close. Before completely closing, it's important to let the witness sort of narrate their feelings and their perspective of what's happening, so that the player who's about to take up the mantle of that witness as you rotate knows where the witness is at in their head. Before you continue to the next scene, before you rotate the narrator to the left and you rotate the witness to the left, each person writes down the clue that was revealed in that scene, and they take an opportunity to leap to conclusions. They're going to write out secretly what they think is behind the mystery to this point, based on the clues revealed so far and where the scenes have taken the story. The witness player describes their actions and speaks for the witness. They're going to react to the narrator and provide their personal feelings and perspective on the story so far. At the end of each scene, the narrator and witness roles rotate. After 5 scenes in part 1, you move into part 2, where many of the special cards start to imbue the tale with more overt supernatural elements. During part 2, the witness can initiate the journey into darkness when they feel a scene has kind of pushed them into that. After 3 scenes in part 2, you can also then have, if you didn't have that thing pushing you into the journey, you can have a force majeure scene, a scene that is specifically built to push that character to their journey into darkness. The journey into darkness is an extended scene, it's called. So it can be a psychological journey or a physical journey. Basically, the witness is choosing or forced to go to a location to confront the final horror. It can be an existential place. It can be an actual location at the heart of a place. It can be whatever you need. And this scene is about how the witness gets to the confrontation. It's about the journey. And players are going to take turns describing the journey over the course of at least 12 mini scenes. Players can either take on the narrator role or tell sort of like environmental and atmospheric things that are happening to the witness, or they can take the witness role and kind of narrate their thoughts as they move closer and closer to this confrontation. They can also take a watcher role on their turn and elaborate what was said by someone else before. So you do this like going around and around till you have at least 12 of these short scenes. Then after that, whoever takes the narrator role after that 12th scene and wants to wrap up the journey can take that last little bit as a narrator and narrate the end of the journey, the entering into the final encounter. Then you get to this second to last scene called the final horror. So you finally encounter this final horror. This is where all the clues are revealed and woven together into the cause of the mystery. It can be an entity or a horrifying revelation. The narrator for the scene is whoever has a good idea for it. The witness is the player to their left, and you need to decide what the witness does as a witness player. Do they fight? Do they flee? Do they stand watching in horror frozen? Next, you move to the epilogue, where whoever was the watcher during the final horror should take on the role of the narrator. If you're only in a 2-player game, you just rotate as normal. And the person to the left of that watcher narrator is made the witness. The witness player describes the witness's fate. So they're going to say what happened to the witness. So did they die? Did they flee but go crazy? What happened? The narrator player describes the insight into what becomes of the final horror. They're kind of saying the final horror is not going to be gone, or if it's destroyed somehow, there's still glimpses of it. It's that sort of sting at the end. It's not dead yet, or it's going to move out into the world and start leaving more clues. It's up to this narrator to kind of give a little bow to that that thing. And anyone can elaborate in the epilogue. Anyone can kind of add flavor and throw out suggestions. So you've completed the game and your story, and now you can take a moment and discuss the tale. It's also fun to go through all the clues and everyone's conclusions they leapt to as the scenes played out and more clues were revealed. So again, Lovecraftesque is designed by Joshua Fox and Becky Annison and is available from blackarmada.com. And we played a game of this recently that's going up with this episode, or that's going up with this primer, and you can go listen to us play. Again, great little game. Some really helpful stuff about what is important to discuss when you're playing a game that has horror or difficult subjects, like ways to make sure everyone is invested and comfortable, because after you get past that, no discussion is really allowed. They do recommend an X card, which is something you should look up. It can be very helpful in just sort of avoiding uncomfortable things, especially when you're edging into horror or things that could make people very uncomfortable. So again, thanks for listening to our episode primer. Get out there and game.
Dying don't agree with me, no. Oh,